你再开始录一遍吧。
Hi everyone, I'm Vita.
I'm Jeffrey,
And I'm Dylan.
And I'm Jennifer.
and we're here to do the Econ 6 week one project. So first question is Dylan.
Okay, so the first question is for the entire United States, how does the total number of trips taken on public transportation in 2018 compare to that from earlier years? So according to the data from for the entire United States, the total number of trips taken on public transportation in 2018 has been overall decreasing compared to that from earlier years. And for the question two, select a sample of some of the largest cities in the US. How do the ridership numbers from 2018 compare with the past? So for some of the largest cities in the US, the same trend has been happening that the ridership numbers for 2018 have also been decreasing when compared with Port Rochester. Other than bus, are DR, demand response, and VP, Vanpool. So demand response is a transit mode comprised of passenger cars, vans, or small buses operating in response calls to calls from passengers or their agents to the transit operator, who then dispatches a vehicle to pick up passengers and transport them to their destinations. Vanpool is a transit mode comprised of vans, small buses, and other vehicles operating as a ride-sharing arrangement, providing transportation to a group of individuals traveling directly between their homes and a regular destination with the same geographical area. The vehicles shall have a minimum seating capacity of 7 persons, including the driver. So for inclusion in the NTD, it is considered mass transit service if it meets the requirements for public mass transportation and is publicly sponsored.
Okay, so question number 4. What is the average cost per trip of each of these modes of transport in Rochester? What share of this total costs are subsidized by taxpayers? So the average cost per trip of DR in Rochester is $37.71, and the average cost for MB is like $4.2. The average fares per trip is like 1.87 for DR and $1.45 for MB. So comparing the average cost and the average fares, we can find that only like 7.9% of this total costs are subsidized by taxpayers, which is not that much.
So for the fifth question, we did a little math, and the total amount of unlinked passenger trips, both from modes MB and DR in Rochester, is 198,640 plus 15,774,000, which gives us 15,973,000. The operating expenses for the two combined is 69 million plus 7.4 million, which gives us 77,151,153 dollars. If we took this large budget per year for public transit and gave it to the riders, it could purchase cars for every single person. The problem with this is that a lot of people working in the public transportation department would lose their jobs. And additionally, all the already built equipment and transportation services would have to go to waste. So for question number 6, speculate which citizens in Rochester are the most prominent users of public transportation. So the citizens in Rochester that use public transportation are probably from the lower classes. A lot of the students that go to the University of Rochester are pretty well off, and they usually have their own means of transportation, whether this is owning a car or renting a car or even Ubering, so they don't have to rely on public transportation. So people that rely on this are probably those from the older generation and worse off financially than other people. So for question 7, it asks us to conduct a short interview. So for this question, I've conducted an interview with some of my friends, along with a local Rochester citizen who's been living here all his life. And I found that most people and especially the Rochester citizen, would much rather have a cash equivalent of what Rochester spends on public transit and have no public transit than the alternative. The reasoning that was given for this is that cash is much more flexible and public transportation is not utilized by everyone, so most people prefer cash.
So for question 8, some of the characteristics of places that may make the transit system more sustainable are urban cities that are highly populated, very dense, and for which jobs and meeting places are well clustered in a number of places, and transit systems that are freight efficient and easily accessible to different people and places are likely to make them more sustainable. The question that could be intentionally leaving out here is whether they actually make the transit system more sustainable by having ridership, or there are other factors. Because despite some of these systems appearing to be poorly working, we should nonetheless continue to publicly support them to provide a quality life for citizens. However, it is such that the single fixed rail transit system can get funding and subsidy from taxpayers. Building the single fixed transit costs a lot of money and time, but is not flexible at all after the construction, where it has designated and limited stops. So publicly supporting them would get more funding. Moreover, the single fixed rail transit as a fixed cost, fixed factor that can't move is the only thing that's benefiting from this rather than the taxpayer. And for question 9 about the jitney system, it'll be very difficult to implement the jitney system in a big city because it's almost impossible to provide such one-to-one highly flexible transportation for this many people, which could cost way more than public transportation now. And it might be possible for some suburban and rural areas to have some small to mid-size assisted living facilities scattered about. But that also requires taking more spaces that could be used for housing, green space, and others to build parking areas. Moreover, in the urban area where it requires a lot of transportation, it could end up causing more traffic and becomes more inconvenient for everyone. Besides, implementing the jitney system requires funding and to employ and train other workers. So the public transportation department is unlikely to abandon the existing transit system to build a new one.
For question number 10, from what I found, the expenditure per person on the public transportation is like really expensive compared to the subsidy those urban residents get from the governments. Every person is spending approximately like $400 per month on the public transportation, while the subsidies are approximately $1 per trip. The fact that like U of R spend $2,959 per student on transportation is such a waste, since like I think many of our students barely take on those buses, especially under this pandemic period. So I think we should like reduce the spends on the public transportation. So that's it for week 6 assignment.